Welcome everyone to BIC Magazine and Downstream 2019's free webinar, Unleash Innovation to Deliver World-Class Capital Projects. My name is Kerr Jeffries and I'm one of the two project directors responsible for building and executing Downstream 2019, the world's largest ever downstream event, home to 7,000 petrochemical, chemical, refining and LNG executives this June 11th and 12th. An event so big we've had to reserve the George R. Brown Convention Center in Houston, Texas. So why are you here? Whether you work in projects, turnarounds or maintenance, everyone is searching for the next great opportunity to improve safety, productivity and efficiency. That's why, in the run-up to Downstream 2019, we brought together major leaders from LyondellBasell, Meridian Energy, Bechtel, Wood and more to discuss the main challenges and opportunities that are available to help you plot a course for the future. They've prepared an incredible discussion that will disclose essential best practices, share lessons learned, impart critical advice in the major areas of project safety, productivity, digitization, workforce development, and offer their hot tips on the future trajectory of the project and technologies that will be used not only in the Gulf Coast, but also beyond. I'm delighted to be joined by the incredibly experienced Walter Pinto, President of Penn Petchem, and formerly the well-respected senior executive from LyondellBasell, who will act as our moderator for the day. We will also be joined by Thomas Grell, President, Oil, Gas and Downstream for the major EPC Wood, and also Lance Medlin, Chief Project Officer for Meridian Energy, who is part of the team that will build the world's cleanest ever refinery. We were also due to be joined by Joe Dorsch and Charlie Capello from LyondellBasell and Bechtel respectively, but unfortunately they've had to prioritize critical project commitments at the last minute. Now before I hand over to Walter, don't forget you can send in your questions at any time ready for our Q&A at the end of the webinar. Also, if you have any technical problems, just drop me, the organizer, a message directly using the webinar platform. Finally, before you all ask, the recordings for this webinar will be emailed to you tomorrow, so no need to ask that in the Q&A. Thanks to everyone in advance. I really hope you enjoy the webinar, and over to you, Walter.
Thank you, Kerr. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening based on where you are in the world. Welcome to BIC Magazine webinar on innovation to deliver world-class capital projects. As Kerr mentioned, my name is Walter Pinto. I recently retired from LyondellBasell, where I had responsibility for global projects, engineering, turnaround, maintenance, and reliability, and also served as site manager at several locations. So I currently serve as the president of Penn Petchem, where we develop digital solutions. So we have today Lance Medlin, as Kerr mentioned, Chief Project Officer for Meridian Energy, and Thomas Grell, President of Wood Downstream and Chemicals Business. I'll have both of them introduce by themselves and give some background. They bring significant capital project, mega project experience. So Lance and Thomas, welcome to the webinar, and thank you for participating. Can you please introduce yourself and give some background? So Lance, why don't you go first?
Thank you, Walter, and thanks to everyone for dialing in or turning into the site. This is a great privilege, and you've put together a strong group. I'm pleased to be here and share the floor with Thomas. As introduction to myself, my own background has been a journey throughout my career, starting, I think my first job was working night shift offshore in Mexico in Campeche Bay, and then learning the ins and outs of an operating facility, and then transitioning into what became a long career in commissioning. My background is commissioning and startup. I'm a mechanical engineer by degree, but I've had the privilege of working for both owner and contractor, from Shell and Chevron and ExxonMobil to KBR and Petrofac on brownfield and greenfield and large capital projects, from domestic projects in the $10 billion range to international projects in the $40 billion range, from stick built to modular construction, and hope to share that experience if this is an opportunity to do that, and also take that experience to Meridian, as we have already broken ground on the Davis refinery, and we prepare to plan and break ground on the Walton Station refinery in West Texas. Thank you, Walter.
Thank you, Lance. Thomas, you want to give a quick background on yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Walter. And hey, good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here this morning. So again, name is Thomas Grell. I run the downstream and chemicals business for Wood. Major presences in the Americas. So major hubs, Western Canada, in the Gulf Coast, and then a number of locations in Latin America. We do about anything from technology studies based on our own technologies over to billion-dollar EPC self-performed execution. So quite a broad range of services that we offer. About half of my business is white collar, and the other is blue collar. We're into projects, mega projects, but also small projects. But we also do operations and maintenance. So a bit about myself. I'm very much, a projects guy. I'm also a mechanical engineer by trade, but I really started my career as a field engineer for a hydro desulfurization plant in Poland, right? And then worked a career through site management, project controls. In a number of locations around the world. So I'm well familiar with, Russia, Eastern Europe, Asia Pacific, Western Canada, and the U.S. And have always worked on very large projects. And back in the day, we called a $500 million lump sum turnkey a mega project, and then a couple of years later it went into the billions or into the tens of billions. So I've seen quite a bit. I've seen differences in execution, fully stick built, fully modularized. Different types of EPCM, EPC, different models, working with discipline-based subcontractors. With general contractors or self-performing the work. So I've seen different models and different, of course, pros and cons to that. And while I run now, various businesses for a number of years for Wood and predecessor organizations, I've always tried to stay very close to projects, particularly the large one, as a sponsor. So, very close to what's going on there. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Appreciate it. Now, it's an exciting time in our industry with the abundance of competitively priced crude supply and the shale gas and so on. It's really unlocked a large investment in the U.S. chemicals, midstream, and refining business. So certainly great opportunity for us in the project side, but as all of us know, 50% of the cost is in the construction, and as project cost, construction goes up, we will lose ultimately the feedstock advantage. And that's where the industry leaders are really focused on how do we contain project costs, how do we contain construction costs. That's where our topic today on safety, productivity, workforce development, and application of digital technology to be more efficient will come into play. So let's focus first on safety. That's very important. If you don't do that business right, everything else we do will not matter. So, Lance, from your perspective, where do you see construction safety performance now as an industry? And can you give us some examples of what you have done to improve safety performance at the construction site?
Yeah, Walter, thank you for that. So safety is, on Meridian's, where we're at, it's, to be honest, it's something we're working on. The industry, I don't think would find this as a surprise. This has been a focus of our industry for many, many years, and it's something that we haven't found a perfect solution for. We still have LTIs, we still have incidents on site. So it's a challenge, and it's one that we spend a lot of time focusing on, appropriately so. One of the successes that we've had in the past is, I guess, twofold. Number one, individual monitoring to really take the safety back to the individual. There's an overlay of corporate policies. There's an overlay of practices, OSHA requirements, standards, specifications, and we're comfortable with those as an industry. We've developed those internally as an industry. It's not necessarily a regulatory body imposing those practices on us. These are things that we've come up with from our own experiences. What we're trying to do is take some of that ownership to an individual level. One of the upstream practices that we're taking downstream is individual monitoring, and this is more applicable for someone in more of a remote location, wellhead monitoring, well site monitoring, where an individual might be spending more of his or her time alone and unmonitored, where individual monitoring becomes more of a reactive notification as opposed to proactive. The benefit from it, though, that we can transfer into downstream is it places some reliability or some responsibility on the individual himself or herself and infers some ownership there, and we expect to see a positive result from that. The other portion of that at Meridian, and I think I would hope we could all agree, is to extend the focus area or the footprint of the job beyond the actual boundaries of the job itself. So North Dakota, for example, half the year it's a beautiful environment. The other half it can be quite hostile, either from just sub-zero temperatures or snowfall or wind. What we want to do is make sure that when our safety protocols and our safety expectations are followed, that it's not just on the job site. And one way to do this is to put some focus on what are the risk factors of the job. And journey management, of course, is something that we're familiar with as well as an industry. So how can we reduce risk off the job site as opposed to just on it as well, whether it be busing people or providing transportation, reducing the travel time to and from work. It could be a number of solutions, but on a digital side, performance monitoring or individual monitoring, and then also reducing that exposure off the job site as well. And I think safety also comes, in a lot of different, it can manifest itself in a lot of different areas. Focus, we have, I think the leading cause or an indicator for several incidents would be distraction. And the distraction can come more from other things in your life just than the job site, thoughts you have from your home, burdens and pressures. We're all individuals, and when we come on the job site, we don't become any less of an individual. We take our lives with us. So creating a more full environment, I don't want to sound cliche, but creating a healthy and happy employee is, I think, a really important factor that maybe doesn't quite get enough. It gets attention, but maybe we can give it some more support. So that's kind of where we're going on that. And as I started, we're still working on it. We're trying to figure out how can we fully eliminate as much risk as possible.
Thank you, Lance. I think you hit the key item there, healthy and happy employee, because I've seen as we set up the site on the projects that I ran, having a clean workplace, having a clean, restrooms, drinking water, and all kind of lunch stands has a big impact on people wanting to work at that site, and the attitude will cascade into various places. So Thomas, from an EPC company perspective, how do you see the current state of construction safety, and also talk through if you have done anything to apply digital technology to improve safety performance?
Yeah, thank you, Walter. I'd say first and foremost, I agree with both of you that if you do not work safely, you cannot have a successful project or a successful business for that matter, right? So I think that's the fundamental, and I still have to believe that it is possible to not hurt people on the project and have accident-free sites, which is possible to do. So I could talk about safety all day, but I'll try to keep it crisp to a couple of points. Early last year we went back and we analyzed where our recordables, and also where our high potential incidents came from, right? And we found out that about 80% of high potentials and recordables were into 4 buckets: driving, so driving safety, working at heights, dropped objects, and then technical safety. So we launched 4 specific campaigns to address those 4 items. And without going through every one of them, that on the driving safety one, to pick one out. So we produced a driving handbook and driving guidelines that apply to company vehicles. We have monitoring systems within the company vehicles, but we also made a really strong push to get this into personal lives, right? Because I think Lance brought it up. We work in areas that are remote, and we have the paradox that we have almost incident-free sites, but people get hurt on their way from and to work. So made a really, really strong push to get that into people's hearts and minds. So that's one point, focus area on, let's say, the majority on the hotspots, if you will. We work quite a bit on the technology side of the game. So we have now an app-based safety program, and the app is really meant to encompass all the good things we do in that area. You can easily look up our procedures. So if you work at height, if you work in a confined space, and so forth, you can easily just click and see the procedure. So that's really easy. What's also good is, you can enter observations directly in the app, which makes it a lot easier. And we saw quite a bit of an upturn after we introduced that. And then analysis gets a lot easier, right? So when I mentioned that 80% of our incidents were into these 4 buckets, well, it's just a lot easier to get to this type of analysis. And also concurrent on a project, right? So when you start a job site, we typically see early on a lot more concerns around housekeeping and so forth, right? While over time that should get a lot better. So that's that's what we're doing. But maybe one last point to mention here. So there is the analyses, and there's the technology, and there's the procedural side and the prescriptive side, and that's all really important. And if you do that smart, you can achieve improvements there. But the key is really, how do you get to the hearts and minds of people? How do you get in their minds so they make the right choices, right? So when they get into their car in the morning, they consider driving as work and as a task, and stay focused and not get distracted as much as if they have their PPE on and work into an operating plant or into an ISBL construction site. So really reaching those hearts and minds. And we do, we have craft labor committees, a lot of good practices there. But that's really the number one. How do you get into people's minds and change their mindset so they apply this consistently? Okay. Anyway, those are just a couple of thoughts.
Good. Thank you, Thomas. Just a follow-up question on the digital technology you mentioned. Now, during construction, are you allowing tablets to be used widespread at the site in the construction field, rather than the trailers? And is that something that you guys are applying?
We do. To be honest, there was some learning curve, and with some operators with SIMOPS, there are restrictions to that, right? But we have, let's say, we have a fail-proof version of that as well. We are not. I would say we're doing this on the large projects at the moment. We're not doing it consistently. And another task for us is to roll this out also to the smaller projects. Another risk area that we typically see is, in the larger jobs in an ISBL area, you have a fairly sophisticated setup, but we also have a number of small jobs, OSBL activities, remote locations, right? And that is actually a big focus area for us, because it's hard. I mean, you can't put the same structure on top of it. Those have to be lean. Those have to be really nimble. And we are working on how can we get, let's say, and that's where an app will actually help. So you don't fill out a bunch of paperwork. You do it right there. But that's definitely a focus area for us, and also an area where we see more high potential incidents than actually in the ISBL areas.
Good. Thank you, Thomas. Just to share my experiences, you highlighted right on creating a culture of care and concern, certainly commitment from the site leadership, and making sure there is a good positive culture at the site goes a long way to helping people to succeed at the construction site. Certainly some of the things that my experiences is, creating a construction-based safety procedure. A lot of the owner sites may have, especially new owners building projects, could be a maintenance-based safety procedure. Makes a day and night difference if you don't have a construction-based safety procedures. Safety work permitting inefficiencies. I think there is opportunity, a lot of improvement, and remove frustrations from the people. And building some of the safety aspects in engineering, things like certified anchor points to tie off. How do you eliminate some of the confined space entries by doing fireproofing off-site, or building trays inside the columns and so on, and certainly doing pre-assembly work or modularization work that Lance may talk about a little bit, I think has helped us remove a lot of the field hours and also complexity in the field and improve on that. So Lance, from your perspective, if you have to touch on maybe one program on the safety that has made a big difference for you, whether you're currently at Meridian or past experience, what is that?
One program that has made a difference. So I'm gonna spin that just a little bit, Walter, and just spend a minute telling you a story about Shell's, one of Shell's projects, the Perdido Spar, which I had the privilege to participate in from engineering through operations. We had a large general assembly every morning, and it was really a SIMOPS meeting, and it was a general work discussion meeting, and we normally had the entirety of the project staff in there. It was a large room, 400 or 500 people. And we had a safety discussion, and we had a guest chair come in, a consultant from the industry, and the first question, of course, was, who believes we can put safety first? And everyone, being well trained and conditioned, raised their hand. And I think the response from the moderator or the speaker was, "Well, you're wrong." And it was, everyone gasped, of course, that someone would dare say we don't put safety first. And he went on to describe the realization that we cannot put safety first in this industry. What we can do is place safety equal. What we do is inherently risk-laden. What we do is inherently dangerous. We do heavy lifts. We have human-machine interfaces. If we were to put safety first, you might argue that we just stay in bed. Even the drive to work is full of risk. But what we can do is properly plan our work, mitigate those risks, and make sure that every activity we do, safety is equal to the activity itself. And that was a real mind kind of bending moment for me. I had never thought of it that way. Although that theory, that philosophy, I've taken with me everywhere I've gone since then, including here. Matter of fact, at Meridian, we just had a repeat of that presentation about a month ago in our operations office in Houston to get people to understand that just by saying safety first and wanting it to be safety first doesn't actually de-risk the activity. We have to acknowledge the risk and approach each activity acknowledging and not doing a disservice to the activity or the risk, by placing safety equal. So maybe not the exact response you were looking for, Walter, but that was probably the program that made the most difference to me in my career, and I hope it has affected everyone that I've shared that with as a mindset on how to approach the activities that we do.
Thank you, Lance. Great example. We manage risk every day. So I wanted to really spend some good amount of time on safety because it is important. That's the first thing and the most important thing in our business. So let's move on to productivity. I think this is another big subject that's a continuous discussion in our industry. Thomas, what would doing on improving productivity on the projects, talk through any processes, whether it's in the engineering, how you build it in the engineering phase early, how do you, as you go into construction, when do you decide to go to construction, and what have you done from the construction perspective to improve productivity in our business?
Okay. Well, it's as you say, it starts with the design, right? So, simpler designs, modularized designs, and even depending on the modularization strategy you pick, you can go anywhere from fully modularized to pre-assemblies and flat packs, also keeping the safety aspect in mind that you mentioned. So there's a lot you can do on the design side. We also worked quite a bit over the years on replicating designs, and that has been a challenge, right? Because every good engineer wants to create something new and great and even better than before. But for a lot of the applications that we have, well, it is not really necessary. So we were quite successful with replicating designs, which saves a lot of time and a lot of money, particularly if you go all the way through fabrication and construction. So that's a big one, really, to design it that certain way, and then through your execution strategy, get as much labor offsite, right? Because I worked in a lot of remote locations, worked in northern Canada, and then when you appreciate you have to fly in people for everything that you do, you have to put them in a camp, and then all the support staff and indirects also have to be flown in and put in a camp. I mean, you get to extremely high cost, and it's just the best practice to get labor offsite. And then even typically stick-built locations like here in the Gulf, you get into labor shortage. As we all know, and I mean, our industry is not helpful, right? We go from feast to famine and back every couple of years, and it's just very hard to keep a continuous workforce, right? But anyway, we have strategies around that as well that pertain to productivity on the workforce side. I mean, I mentioned about half of our team is blue collar, and we look very much at keeping our following and keeping continuity in there and onboarding new people. But anyway, those are a couple of thoughts, really: design, execution strategy, modularization, and keeping the following in the workforce, and they add up to productivity gains.
Thank you, Thomas. Lance, you're executing big projects, but away from Gulf Coast. Certainly have your own challenges there. So how are you approaching to improve productivity in construction on your projects?
Wow. So that's a large focus for Meridian. Is the refineries that we're designing and building are in remote areas, and North Dakota can be quite hostile. But the winters of West Texas aren't much better. It can be pretty cold, pretty windy. There are some resource constraints. It kind of so I'll take you back to the tablets. You had asked about digital technology, et cetera. And this will tie into productivity. So there's a theory called the Fisherman Theory, where you can imagine a guy walk in and say, well, I caught a fish this big, and he's just kind of waving his hands out. But the question is, well, where's the fish? Well, do it back. And The point is that when we don't see things ourselves, we have a hard time believing them. And the use of tablets, we've applied tablets in the field specifically to punch list management because taking a picture of a defect or a component that's not correct can be worth 1,000 words. But that same Fisherman Theory applies to some of the pressures we have in planning and construction. There's this built-in pressure in our industry to get to construction. So you start a project, you're in detailed design, and everyone wants to see the ground get broken. They want to see pipe being erected, and these are things that we can measure because we can see them. One of the challenges in a phase 4 project execution model is not going to the field too early. It affects productivity, it affects safety, it affects the quality of the engineering. So you've got to restrain and have that discipline to make sure that you are at an engineering point where you can pass that gate and go to that next period.
So, Lance, you hit a very important point on construction readiness and engineering perspective. So, what do you guys do for assess the construction readiness, and what's your kind of a thumb rule on engineering complete before you go to the field?
Well, IFC drawings at least to an agreed percent, say 80%, or you can say whatever you want. The complexity of the facility will kind of dictate where your milestones are set. The key is to set them ahead of time, to have some pretty rigorous control points on the MOC process or when you can change that. There'll be a lot of pressures. There'll be enough pressures created by themselves without us creating more by waiting to make those decisions. And I'll take you back to commissioning. So a systems completion database or a commissioning database is really a component registry of AITRs, BITRs, pre-MC, post-MC. What we do is bring that forward into really even into a phase 3. When you're approaching the end of your FEL3 and your feed, to start populating your systems completion database on a component level, tag-specific component level, and set those into the milestones, into the schedule, so that you're predicted on when you'll make those transitions, and then it's just a matter of having the discipline to follow that schedule.
Yeah, good. I've seen a lot of good construction readiness assessments, and I was part of a project organization, mega project that we had to build, and enforce discipline ourselves to make sure all our construction readiness was green before we enter the field. And I think by then it was 60% engineering that we done, and I think we had some pretty good benefit out of that. Thomas, we all know in a mega project, it's how piping goes, the project goes. We do everything. We can have all civil structure work done, have all the equipment in the field come on time, but things fall apart in piping area. What has Wood done on focused on especially piping, how you can improve productivity in that area? What are the various approaches you've done on making sure piping construction stays on schedule?
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with you. Piping is typically the bulk of a petrochemical plant, right? But I find the E&I, the electrical and instrumentation, as important, and probably more troublesome in some instances, because it's even later in the game, right? And if you stumble there, it really affects your critical path. So, I guess the first one is really old news. Finish your design, right? Have your IFCs ready and don't change them, right? And then of course you need to think carefully through your material strategy and your prefabrication strategy, right? to what level do you spool at vendors? Do you apply modules? What amount of field work do you do? So that's pretty important there. And early on, I'm always in favor of spreading wildly between a number of vendors and fab shops, and we have our own as well. So have a good mix depending on the size of the project, and always have a little bit of buffer there, a bit of a joker, if you will, if one of the vendors or fabricators stumbles, so you can transfer scope, right? And then, of course, on the field side, there are a number of strategies. Depends a little bit on, again, is it an in-plant revamp? Is it a greenfield facility? How accessible is it? Again, is it stick-built or modularized? But we have some cases where we are in a very congested area and have to thread in pipe spools. So there we spend a lot of time on getting the size of the spools right and the sequence. Because if you don't, you try to kind of thread in the Christmas tree into a pipe rack, and then you block the access for other work, right? In another case where we had a beautiful greenfield facility, lots of space, we built it concurrently with the steel in the pipe racks, and we had everything lined up. So that was just a dream from a productivity point of view, right? So I guess the short of it is, I would recommend you have to plan individually, put a lot of thought into the individual plan and the circumstance, and the strategy is different for a congested brownfield revamp or versus a greenfield job, and even there modularized versus stick built. And then again, big focus on E&I, because what I do find is, particularly the quantity changes or the methodologies to do takeoffs in E&I, you need to be fairly skilled to get a really good cable schedule and good cable quantities done in a FEL 3 environment, right? So that's an important focus area. We did have some challenges on that in the past, where we didn't have our allowances right because the basis wasn't right, So we put a lot of focus on that in the past. So yeah, it's a lot, and then of course you get into insulation, you get into heat tracing of sorts, so that they all can compound the issue and need individual attention.
So Thomas, from application of digital technology, have you guys done anything, or if the industry is doing anything on tracking all the materials in the yard using RFID tags, or seeing real-time progress? Because now the logistics or supply chain is global. You get equipment, material from all over the world. Getting a real-time metrics on the progress of fabrication and material, spools build up and so on. Anything you guys are doing to get real-time data and metrics on supply chain?
Yeah, we have used RFID tags, and we use them both for the material side and also for the safety side, right? Because you can get into these distance monitoring to heavy equipment. Yes, we do. But to be honest, it makes a big difference whether you how you set up your project, how many fabrication shops and sub-vendors you involve, and whether you do this on a local or global basis. So we had mixed results with that, to be honest. A couple of other areas, or let's say you really need to factor in this execution strategy and procurement strategy when you apply those technologies. And I would recommend, if you haven't done this before, you want to start small, ideally in an environment that you can control 100% yourself. Couple of other things we've done, going a little bit to the productivity side. We are big into the AWP philosophy, And for us, that really came from the offshore side, from the upstream side, and work in large projects and remote locations, right? So the whole methodology of getting your your work phase planning in place, all the way from construction work packages to field packages, and we have digitized that, so put it on a tablet environment, and we see some really good examples here, some really good progress, because it is a lot of paperwork you have to move, and that's much easier in a tablet environment.
Good. Thank you, Thomas. AWP has been a big focus area for the industry now. Lance, your expertise is in the commissioning and area and startup and final phases. But from your perspective, looking at that from the lens of commissioning, how do you see improvement in productivity as construction and sequencing and all those pieces? And have you applied AWP theories and help us to understand from the commissioning view perspective and any improvement in productivity?
Yeah, thanks, Walter. So I would also like to mention just kind of one more thing on the RFID tags. Thomas brings up a good point. So we've implemented that as well with mixed results, and I think the takeaway from that is the technology is there, but what we didn't do, I think where we had an opportunity to execute that better, or implement that better, was to focus on the training. So you've got to have the training and not just the technology. So that was a really good point that Thomas made. There's a lot of good tech out there for material management. Is the organization trained? Is your supply chain trained to use it? Is also important. On productivity, so tying planning, productivity, and safety together, I think it speaks to how well we've done as an industry. You almost can't talk about one without talking about the other two, or vice versa. The productivity for us, the focus for us for Meridian, is modular design and modular fabrication. One of our standing mandates as a company is to avoid serial number ones. We've got the privilege of designing and building with our EPC partners refineries. Well, refining technology has been around for quite a while, so it's proven tech and it exists. What we try and do is de-risk the projects where we can, and a lot of that is in productivity. Thomas mentioned spreading, in different words, he mentioned basically spreading the fabrication work around. One way to maintain productivity is to de-risk the fabrication by making sure that you've got a number of qualified fabricators. And the same thing with construction, de-risking construction by using norms, stick built versus modular versus a module build. What we're aiming to do at Meridian is to focus on where are the productivity factors most stabilized, Gulf Coast versus other regions, and then move the construction man hours or the fabrication man hours out of a stick built environment where you have less productivity factor or less productivity norms into an area where you have more, such as the Gulf Coast. I think another point that was brought up that gets overlooked a lot is the I&E side. Thomas was right to bring that up. As an industry, when we see a problem, we do our best to solve it. There were some productivity issues with piping. As piping goes, the project goes. Well, we've spent a lot of time focusing on that in upfront planning, level 5 work packs, construction work packs. We've from paper-based to digital. We've almost mastered it. We've become as good as we probably can, and we're always improving. Where we have overlooked modular builds is on the E&I side. So when people say we're going to do a modular build, they're mostly talking about pipe, steel, the structure itself. You still have to take that module in the field and pull the cables and pull fiber. So we've spent quite a bit of time to date at Meridian, and we're spending more time on how to modularize, increase productivity, not just on the mechanical side, but the I&E side as well.
Okay. Thank you, Lance. I think that's a good discussion on productivity. I think the whole industry is lots of focus in that area, and I appreciate both Thomas and Lance, your view on that. Just to move on, spend a couple of minutes on workforce maybe. Lance, what are you guys doing and what are you seeing on workforce availability, skilled craft person availability? Or think about, do you guys planning to do any skills validation as the new people enter the workforce? So talk through about some of the challenges you see from the owner company perspective.
Yeah, so that's a two-part question, Walter, and it gets complex. So it's a good thing and a bad thing. So we struggle from it. We struggle as an industry in that there's a shortage of skilled craft. But that's a good thing because that means as an economy or as an industry, that means there's a lot of work and people are working. They haven't chosen different career paths. They're still in the industry. We just have a lot of work. The competencies and training, spending time not just in training but also competency verification, it's an industry by itself, and rightly so. So we've got to make sure that we spend the time up front to develop those programs, to partner with companies that have spent their business, made that their business. But it goes to the contractor itself, not just the employee. One of the takeaways, from the last wave of big LNG projects was, for us, Meridian was the acknowledgement that yes, it was a large vacuum sound, and all the skilled craft would go to these large capital projects, but it also limited the number of contracts in the industry itself. So you've got a few major contracts being issued, drawing up a significant amount of the resources, and what that left is capable contractors looking for opportunities for revenue. So you had an environment where capable upstream companies were now going into midstream going into upstream, and maintenance contractors that might have been an upstream contractor getting successfully involved into downstream, which is good from a knowledge sharing perspective, and it just kind of ties back into the competency training and competency awareness where you need to spend time up front making sure that those competencies exist not just in the employee or the actual worker, but in the contractor themselves, and make sure everyone is set up for success.
Good, thank you. This is such an important item. Thomas, you guys recruit a lot of people, do a lot of construction. From your perspective, what are your challenges and what do you see ahead?
Yeah, and lots of challenges on attracting workforce, right? I mean, let's face it, our industry is not the most attractive to folks. They're in the age of electrification and urbanization and all those good themes. We're probably not often the number one choice. So we spend a lot of time, verifying skill sets. We spend time and money training people. We spend time taking care of our existing workforce, keeping that following. And there's obviously, the leadership, the staff, the superintendents, the GMs, the foremen, but then also, craft labor. We try to balance between the various businesses that we have in the Americas and allow people to go back and forth to give them as much as possible continuous employment, right? So, because as I mentioned before, I think our industry is facing this challenge, but then we created the challenge to a good degree, right? With all the ups and downs and discontinuities and lack of training and so forth, right? So, yeah, it's a challenging subject. Again, we rely on the long-term, blue collar and craft labor we had. We try to move between projects and maintenance work to a degree. That doesn't always work, but it works for a number of folks. So we balance and try to keep us as steady as possible. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. I'm going to ask one question before I hand off the call for any Q&A. What is the one lesson learned from last wave of project that you want to improve on? Thomas, from your perspective, what's the one lesson learned from the last wave that you want to apply for the next wave?
It's very simple. Stick to the basics, right? And the basics are, we all know what front-end loading means, and each stage of FEL has a purpose and an outcome, right? So the basic is, when you're in a FEL 3, you shouldn't do FEL 2 things, and when you're in FEL 4, you shouldn't do FEL 3 things, right? Stick to the basics. Another basic is, when you have a staffing curve, you have to staff to that curve or overstaff, When you have a leadership team, you shouldn't allow them to be changed out halfway through, right? So there are all these basics. Have an execution plan early in the game, begin with the end in mind. We all know how to do it, right? That's not news. But we have to be careful that, now we see some rush in the market. We see tax incentives. We see schedule pressure. We see a lot of things. In some areas, we see clients rushing. We've seen some clients who went in early. And I think the danger is that, again, folks may chase schedule and sacrifice some of the basics, the best practices that we all know and should adhere to. And that's definitely something I'm very mindful of, that we are sticking to those basics, so whatever we do, we deliver well.
Thank you, Thomas. I was smiling here. I had a good saying, if you only knew what you already know. I think we try to repeat the same mistakes. I think it's not that we don't know what's the issue. It's just sticking to that discipline. Lance, from your perspective, you've done projects all over the world and big mega projects. What's the one lesson learned that we don't want to repeat in the next wave of projects?
Well, I would just almost word for word echo everything Thomas just said. We are certainly creatures of habit. I think about every 12 to 15 years, we act as if we've never seen this before. And 12 or 15 years from now, after we've spent a decade or so, curing what ails us, we'll probably have the same conversation again. It's the pressures that we find during execution are repetitive. It's the same pressures. They may take on a different face, but it's all schedule and management of change and sticking to the plan, making sure you don't mobilize too early, making sure you don't pass gates too early. We have a few different factors maybe now as the economy is booming and some of the regulatory pressures have been removed or lessened, and that you've got new entries, and not just from the typical players in our industry. You've got equity-based startups. You've got a lot of different pressures, financial or otherwise, that would come onto a project team. But it's repetitive in that it's outside pressures on the project, and the projects have to be allowed to manage their business without those influences being pressured upon them. Consistency in your management team, consistency in your roadmap, making sure your FEL2 is done, making sure your FEL3 is done before moving into execution on phase 4. Sticking to the plan. We've all heard the saying, build the plan, execute the plan, and we have to have the discipline to do that.
Yeah. Thank you. I think a great finish there. So, Cor, I'll turn it up to you, and I think if there are some questions coming in, maybe, and we can entertain one or two questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Walter, and thank you very much, guys, for participating. So there's a couple of questions that we have time for, but we're going to have to answer them really, really kind of succinctly. So I guess kind of the first one is how do you assess the potential return on investment or I guess how do you assess investment in new technologies that might only provide a qualitative benefit? The example given is, say, necessarily like drones around safety. It's really a qualitative rather than a quantitative benefit. So how do you assess potential investment in those kind of technologies?
Thomas, you want to take that question?
To me, it's more a qualitative assessment. If it pertains to safety, we're not really looking at dollars anyway. We apply drones to actually verify construction progress more on a qualitative basis. So, qualitative. That's really how I look at it.
Lance, any thoughts on that? On any technology that you guys have applied that you had to make a business case or think through the business case and how you write about that?
Well, a lot of examples, and I don't think we have time to really probably go into it. But drones, that's a good example, and a qualitative return is a return on investment. So that's one form of investment, and we can justify that quite easily. And I do think you can run through the process as well on man hours that could be saved. You can do a justification for it. I think a new component in the industry is wireless technology. Could you use wireless components as control points in your process? What's the risk factors? There are some facilities in the U.S. on the East Coast that are using wireless technology as control points in the process, and other people are more reluctant to do that. So we spend the time up front going through that analysis, and it's a wireless device is inherently a few dollars more than a wired device. So is it worth the investment? And I guess that's the analysis you have to do individually, by location, by complexity, by team.
Good. Cole, do we have another one time for one more question? So.
Yeah, we got a question from me, really, which is quite self-serving. I guess all of you were involved in Downstream 2019. So just very quickly, I mean, what are you all each hoping to get out of Downstream 2019?
Lance, you want to take that?
Yeah, thank you, Walter. Well, it's always a pleasure meeting fellow participants in this industry, not just at the convention, but we have such a broad footprint globally and even domestically. Even opportunities like this to talk on the phone will come few and far between. So the peer conversations and spending time meeting new people, and also seeing new technology and hearing about new technology, that networking opportunity is very valuable for us. I'm really looking forward to that. And I will apologize in advance for anyone coming to see anything I'm participating in. I'm a lot better looking on the phone, so you'll have to suffer through it.
Thomas, any final thoughts on the Downstream conference?
Likewise, I look forward to the networking and the sharing of best practices. And what I'm keen in is, we all know the buzzwords and we know the main trends and innovations. I think it's really getting this firsthand feedback, what really works with you guys or doesn't, right? And so it's really this practical experience with a couple of things. The personal networking for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Lance, for sharing your immense experience with the team here. And certainly for me, I think these conferences add a lot of value. There is a lot of innovation going on in our industry, a lot of things people are trying, especially from the digital tools application in our business. And I think collectively, when we network and we talk to each other and we learn each other and listen to each other, I think collectively as an industry, we can be a much better industry and certainly help us build projects in the U.S. and keep the jobs here and have a prosperous industry for us. So thank you very much for joining us, Lance and Thomas, and thank you very much for all the participants for calling in today. And I'll hand off to Kurt for any last-minute comments.
Yeah, so I've got about 45 seconds to crack this out. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating. Thomas, Lance, Walter, and BIC Magazine for hosting. Really, the next steps are quite simple. If you've enjoyed this discussion, if you feel like you really want to be a part of the industry as it moves forward, then you really have to be at Downstream 2019 this June 11th and 12th. There's information on the screen, but very simply, just search downstreamevent.com and sign up, because otherwise you will miss out on the world's largest downstream event and the only meeting point globally for petrochemicals, chemicals, refining, and LNG. There's a discount code on the screen. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating, and I think we've just about run out of time. So thanks all. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.